Hey, ho, ho, ho. Merry Christmas, everybody. I've already got a little bit of blood on me. I don't know what you guys are doing there at home. Hopefully, you are having an incredible Christmas Eve. For those of you out there that had a chance to watch the episode that dropped today with Jeff Berlanger, also let me know if you guys can hear me. Uh, Let me know in the chat there. What? Santa? Santa, what? I don't know what that means. Can you guys hear me? Okay, cool. I don't usually like this setup obviously is different. I got a little background thing here and I don't have my headphones on. So like a lot of times I have the headphones on so that I can hear you guys. Like I can hear what's going on and I understand that, like feedback, all that stuff. And I don't have headphones on. So I wanted to make sure everybody could hear me before we get started tonight. But if you've watched the episode with Jeff Berlanger that dropped today at 3 o'clock, one of the things that he talks about on there is that it was the age-old tradition in Europe to tell ghost stories on Christmas Eve. And of course, in my infinite wisdom, I thought, why don't I tell ghost stories on Christmas Eve? I just so happen to have a Santa outfit for such an occasion. So I was like, hell yeah, we're going to do this thing. And I'm going to wear my bloody Santa costume and we'll do some scary stories for Christmas Eve. So I kind of wanted to do it late. Also, I had a Christmas, like a family Christmas party to go to tonight, which was really great. I got the book Chaos, the Manson story that Tom O'Neill wrote. And consequently, I would really, really love to get Tom O'Neill on the podcast. And we'll see how that goes here. I sent him a message. So hopefully I'll hear back from him. It'd be great to get him on the podcast. We've also got some great news because I got a bunch of people that are going to be coming on the podcast in the new year. So we've got some stuff coming for that. We've got, I'll just let you guys know this now since we're waiting on more people to join in. Make sure you share this. I know people are out, holiday parties, the whole bit. But if you're at home, come and check this out. It's going to be fun. So, our very first episode of 2025, we'll be talking to John Wesley Anderson about the John Benet Ramsey case. So we're going to have somebody on for John Benet. We're also then, it's kind of tossed up. We've got a couple different possibilities for the second episode in January. We'll see who gets to me soon and who schedules it out. But we have upcoming, we have somebody that'll be on talking about the JFK assassination. Jeff Mudgett is going to be coming on to talk about H.H. Holmes and Jack the Ripper. We also have a gentleman and a fellow author that's going to be coming on, and he is part of like this Cold Case Foundation and stuff. So we're going to talk, or not the Cold Case Foundation, but he does a bunch of cold case stuff. He is also a professor, so we're going to end up talking to him. And so we've got a lot of things planned. We've got a lot of things planned. So stay tuned. We've got all kinds of things. I want to read you guys this little introduction before we get started. And Mary, thanks for staying up super late. I know it is very late there for you now, because usually we start at 5 and it's already late. It's got to be like 1 o'clock in the morning or something. Yes, hit the thumbs up button. Make sure you subscribe. Those of you that are on here, if you're not subscribed, make sure you do that, because that's a good thing. So, but I know Mary, it's like super late there. Or I guess early now, early Christmas morning. So Merry Christmas. there in Scotland right now. All right. The tradition of telling ghost stories on Christmas Eve was firmly established by the Victorian period. Its origins are in the early Christian belief that souls in purgatory were most active on the day before a holy day and thus more likely to intrude into our world. Given that Christmas Eve night is one of the longest nights of the year in the Northern Hemisphere, it was also the perfect time to hunker down and enjoy the special kind of festive coziness that you can only get from scaring yourself silly with spooky tales. However, in Britain, there were also other reasons why short ghost stories gained such huge popularity in the 19th century. The Industrial Revolution also seemed to result in an increased interest in the supernatural. The more people knew about our world and could explain it, the more they wondered why about what was beyond our ken and unexplainable. Uh, More prosaically, the growth of the magazine industry via improvements in public literacy, which created a new market, and printing technology, which enabled mass production of reading matter for the first time, enabled the creation of periodicals filled with short fiction. Ghost stories, which were usually short and self contained, fitted the brief perfectly. The British Library holds hundreds of these magazines from the 19th and early 20th centuries, and there are sure to be more ghost stories waiting to be rediscovered. So there you go. It started a long, long time ago, and I'm excited to carry on that tradition now and to talk about and to read some of these ghost stories. Most of the ones I'm going to read tonight, and we'll see how many we get done in an hour. I don't know how long it's going to take me to read this, but most of them are more modern. The Victorian ghost stories are long, and there were people that fell asleep by candlelight and oil lamps and fell down and died. I don't want that to happen tonight. So and like I got this crazy background going here, and it keeps like popping in and out. So I keep feeling like there's ghosts over top of my head. So maybe it gives you a little bit of ambience for these creepy ghost stories. And I think I got about 3 minutes before I got to take this hat off because my brain is sweating already. All right, let's see what we got in the chat here. I see some Cindy. Hopefully Cindy's here with us. Cindy, I hope you're here. I don't know if you're here or not, but Shez saying that Cindy. But Merry Christmas, Mary, Sherry. It's Christmas Day here now in the UK. Yeah, you guys, it's Christmas Day over there. My friends in Australia, it is Christmas Day there as well. I already got pictures and stuff for Christmas Day, but I got our little book here, and we're going to start out. Matter of fact, I'm going to take the hat off. Sorry, guys. It only lasted 5 minutes. Man. So here, let me tell you a story before I yes, I saw you, Cammy. Hello. Merry Christmas. So I'll tell you a story about the Santa suit. So a couple years ago, I was going and doing a holiday market called the Merry Krampus, and it is up in Columbus. And so I was going up there, and I thought, man, what a better way to celebrate than getting an old Santa suit covered in blood and going as Santa Ramirez. And so I did that. And if you guys see the little promo picture and everything, I'm clean shaven in that promo picture. And everybody says that that is much, much creepier. I look a lot more forgiving, I guess, with a beard. I always tell people that, like, put your glasses back on, grow a beard, because like it's not nearly as scary that way. I guess that means my face is scary without it. But my buddy Kenny said that I look terrifying without the beard. So there you go, bearded up, just like Santa Claus. And we're going to now go into some spooky stories tonight. All right, this first one is called Dark Christmas by Jeanette Winterson. We had borrowed the house from a friend none of us seemed to know. High Fallen House stood on an eminence overlooking the sea. It was a square Victorian gentleman's residence. The large bay windows looked down through the pines towards the shore. Thick stone steps led the visitor up to the double front door, where a Gothic bell pull released a loud, mournful clang deep into the distance of the house. Laurel lined the drive. The stable block was disused. The walled garden had been locked up in 1914 when the gardeners went to war. Only one had returned. It had been warned that the high brick wall enclosing the garden was unsafe. As I passed it slowly in the car, I saw a faded notice falling off the paint peeled door. Do not enter. I was the first to arrive. My friends were following by train, and I was to collect them the next day, and then we would settle down to Christmas. I had driven from Bristol and was tired. There was a Christmas tree roped on the top of my 4x4 and a trunk load of provisions. We were not near any town, but the housekeeper had left a stack of wood to build a fire, and I had brought a shepherd's pie and a bottle of Roja for my first night. I guess that's Rioja. I don't know what kind of alcohol that is, but apparently it's alcohol. The kitchen was cheerful enough once I had got the fire going and the radio playing while I unpacked our festive supplies. I checked my phone. No signal. Still, I knew the time of the train tomorrow, and it was a relief to feel that the world had gone away. I put my food in the oven to heat up, poured a glass of wine, and then went upstairs to find myself a bedroom. The first landing had 3 bedrooms leading off it. Each had a moth-eaten rug, a metal bed, and a mahogany chest of drawers. At the far end of the landing was a second set of stairs up to the attic floor. I'm not a romantic about maids' rooms or nurseries, and there was something about that second set of stairs that made me hesitate. The landing was bright in a sudden way of late sun on a winter's afternoon. Yet the light ended abruptly at the foot of the stairs, as though it couldn't go any further. I didn't want to be near that set of stairs, so I chose the room at the front of the house. As I went to bring up my bag, the house bell started to ring, its jerky metallic hammer sounding somewhere in the guts of the house. I was surprised but not alarmed. I expected the housekeeper. I opened the door. There was no one there. I went down the steps and looked around. I admit I was frightened. The night was clear and soundless. There was no car in the distance, no footsteps walking away. Determined to conquer my fear, I walked round a little. Then turning back to the house, I saw it. The bell wire ran along the side of the house under a sheltering gutter. Perhaps 30 or 40 bats were dangling upside down on the vibrating wire. The same number swooped and swerved in a dark mass. Obviously, their movement on the wire had set off the bell. I like bats. Clever bats. Good. Now supper. I ate, I drank. I wondered why love is so hard and life so short. I went to bed. The room was warmer now, and I was ready to sleep. The sound of the sea ebbed into the flow of my dreams. I woke from a dead sleep in dead darkness to hear. What? What can I hear? It sounded like a ball bearing or a marble rolling on the bare floor above my head. It rolled hard and hard, then hit the wall. Then it rolled again in the other direction. This might not have mattered, except that the other direction was upwards. Things can come loose and roll downwards, but they cannot come loose and roll up, unless someone. That thought was so unwelcome that I dismissed it along with the law of gravity. Whatever was rolling over my head must be a natural dislodging. The house was draughty and unused. The attics were under the eaves where my kind of weather might get in. Weather or an animal. Remember the bats? I pulled the covers up to my eyebrows and pretended not to listen. There it was again. Hard, on hit, on pause, on roll. I waited for sleep, waiting for daylight. We are lucky, even the worst of us, because daylight comes. It was a brooding day on that 21st of December, the shortest day of the year. Coffee, coat on, car keys. Shouldn't I just check the attic? The second set of stairs was narrow. The servant's staircase. It led to a lathe and a plaster corridor barely a shoulder width wide. I started coughing. Breathing was difficult. Damp had dropped into the plaster in thick, crumbling heaps on the floorboards. As below, there were 3 doors. 2 were closed. The door to the room above my room was ajar. I made myself go forward. The room was under the eaves as I had guessed. The floor was rough. There was no bed, only a washstand and a clothes rail. What surprised me was the nativity scene in the corner. Standing about 2 feet tall, it was more like a doll's house than a Christmas decoration. Inside the open fronted stable stood the animals, the shepherds, the crib, Joseph. Above the roof on a bit of wire was a battered star. It was old, handmade, in a workmanlike, but not craftsmanlike sort of way. The painted wood now rubbed and faded like pigments of time. I thought I would carry it downstairs and put it by our Christmas tree. It must have been made for the children when there were children here. I stuffed my pocket with the figurines and animals and left quickly, leaving the door open. I had to set off for the station. Stephen and Susie could help me with the rest later. As soon as I was out of the house, my lungs felt clear again. It must be the plaster dust. The drive to the station was along the coast road. Lonely and unyielding, the road turned into a series of blind bends and tight corners. I met no one, and I saw no one. Gulls circled over the sea. The station itself was a simple shelter on a long single track. There were no information boards. I checked my phone. No signal. At last, the train appeared distantly down the track. I was excited. Memories of visiting my father as a child when he was stationed at the RAF base and gave me a rush of pleasure whenever I traveled by train or come to meet one. The train slowed and halted. The guard stood down for a moment. I watched the doors. It wasn't a big train, this branch line train, but none of the doors opened. I waved at the guard who came over. I'm meeting my friends. He shook his head. The train's empty. Next stop is the end of the line. I was confused. Had they got off at the earlier stop? I described them. The guard shook his head again. I noticed strangers. They would have boarded at Carlisle. Asked me where to get off. Always do. Is there another train before tomorrow? One a day, and that's your lot, and more than anybody needs in a place like this. Where are you staying? High Fallen House, do you know it? Oh, hey, we all know it. He looked as if he were about to say something else. Instead, he blew his whistle. The empty train pulled away, leaving me staring down the long track, watching the red light like a warning. I needed to get a signal on my phone. I drove on past the station, following the steep hill, hoping some height would connect me to the rest of the world. At the top of the hill, I stopped the car and got out, pulling up the collar of my coat. The first snow hit my face with insistence, sharp and spiteful, like little bites. I looked out across the whitening bay. That must be High Fallen House. What is that? 2 figures walking on the beach? Is it Stephen and Susie? Had they driven here after all? Then, as I strained my eyes against the deceit of the distance, I realized that the second figure was much smaller than the first. They were walking purposefully towards the house. When I arrived back, it was nearly dark. I put on the lights, blew the fire into a blaze. There was no sign of the mysterious couple I had seen from the hill. Perhaps it had been the housekeeper and her daughter come to make sure that everything was all right. I had a telephone number for Mrs. Wormwood, but without a signal, I could not call her. The snow was thickening in windy swirls. Relax. Have a whiskey. I leaned on the warm kitchen range with my whiskey in my hand. The wooden figures I had brought down from the attic were lying on the kitchen table. I should go up and get the stable. I don't want to. I bounded up the first set of stairs, using energy to force out unease. At my bedroom, I put on the light. That felt better. The second set of stairs stood in the shadows at the end of the long landing. I felt that constriction in my lungs again. Why am I holding onto the handrail like an old man? I could see that the only light in the attic was on the top of the stairs. I found the round brown Bakelite switch. I flicked down the nipple. A single bulb lit up reluctantly. The room was straight ahead. The door was closed. Hadn't I left it open? I turned the handle and stood in the doorway, the room dimly lit by the light from the stars. Washstand, nativity, clothes rail. On the clothes rail was a child's dress. I hadn't noticed that before. I supposed I had been in a hurry. Pushing aside my misgivings, I went in purposefully and bent down to pick up the wooden nativity. It was heavy, and I had just got it secure in my arms when the light on the landing went out. Hello? Who's there? There's someone breathing like they can barely breathe, not faint, struggling for breath. I mustn't turn around because whoever or whatever it is behind me. I stood still for a minute, steadying my nerve. Then I shuffled forwards towards the edge of the light coming up from downstairs. At the doorway, I heard a step behind me, lost my balance, and put out a hand to steady myself. My hand gripped something wet. The clothes rail, it must be the dress. My heart was overbeating. Don't panic. Bakelite, bad wiring, strange house, darkness, aloneness. But you're not alone, are you? Back in the kitchen with whiskey, Radio 4, and pasta boiling, I examined the dress. It was for a small child, and it was hand knitted. The wool was smelly and sopping. I washed it out and left it hanging over the sink to drip. I guessed there must be a hole in the roof, and the dress must have been soaking up the rain for a long time. I ate my supper, tried to read, told myself it had been nothing at all. It was only 8 p.m. I didn't want to go to bed, though the snow outside was like a quilt. I decided to arrange the nativity. Donkey, sheep, camels, wise men, shepherd star, Joseph. The crib was there, but it was empty. There was no Christ child, and there was no Mary. Had I dropped them in the dark room? I hadn't heard anything fall, and these wooden figures were 6 inches tall. Joseph was wearing a woolen tunic, but his wooden legs had painted puttas. I pulled off the tunic. Underneath, wooden Joseph wore a painted uniform. First World War. When I turned him around, I saw there was a gash in his back like a stab wound. My phone beeped. I dropped Joseph, grabbed the phone. It was a text message from Susie. Trying to call you. Leave tomorrow. I pressed call. Nothing. I tried to send a text. Nothing. But what did it matter? Suddenly, I felt a relief and calm. They had been delayed, that was all. Tomorrow they would be here. I sat down again with the nativity. Perhaps missing figures were inside. I put in my hand. My fingers closed around a metal object. It was a small iron key with a hoop top. Maybe it was the key to the attic door. Outside, snow had fallen. Snow on snow. The sky had cleared. The moon sped above the sea. I had gone to bed and I was deep asleep when I heard it clearly. Above me, footsteps, pacing, down the room. Hesitate, turn, return. I lay in bed, eyes staring blindly at the blind ceiling. Why do we open our eyes when we can't see anything? And what was there to see? I don't believe in ghosts. I wanted to put on the light, but what if the light didn't come on? Why would it be worse to be in the darkness? I had not chosen then darkness, I was choosing. But it would be worse. I sat up in bed and pulled back the curtain a little. The moon had been so bright tonight. Surely there would be light. There was light. Outside the house, hand in hand, stood the still and silent figures of a mother and child. I did not sleep again till daylight. When I slept and woke again, it was almost midday, and already the light was lowering. Hurrying to get coffee, I saw that the dress was gone. I had left it dripping over the sink, and it was gone. Get out of the house. I set off for the station. There was an air frost that coated the trees in glittering white. It was beautiful and deathly. The world held in ice. On the road, there were no car tracks, no noise, but the roar and drops of the sea. I moved slowly and saw no one. In the white, unmoving landscape, I wondered if there was anyone else left alive. At the station, I waited. I waited some time past the time until the train whistled on the track. The train stopped. The guard got down and saw me. He shook his head. There is no one, he said. No one at all. I thought I would cry. I took out my phone. I flashed up the message, trying to call you, leave tomorrow. The guard looked at it. Happen it's you should be who should be leaving, he said. There's no more trains past Carlisle now till the 27th. Tomorrow was the last, and that's been canceled. Weather. I wrote down a number and gave it to the guard. Will you phone my friends and tell them I'm on my way home? On the slow journey back to High Fallen House, I filled my mind with my departure. It would be slow and dangerous to travel at night, but I could not consider another night alone, or not alone. All I had to do was manage 40 miles to Inchbarn. There was a pub and a guest house and remote but normal life. The text message kept playing in my head. Had it really meant that I should leave? And why? Because Susie and Stephen couldn't come? Weather? Illness? It's all a guessing game. The fact is, I have to go. The house seemed subdued when I returned. I had left the lights on and went straight upstairs to pack my bag. At once I saw the light to the attic was on. I paused, breathed. Of course it's on. I never switched it off. That proves it's a wiring fault. I must tell the housekeeper. My bag packed, I threw the food into the box and put everything back in the car. I had the whiskey in the front, a blanket I stole from the bed, and I made a hot water bottle just in case. It was only 5 o'clock. At worst, I'd be in Inchbarn by 9 p.m. I got in the car and turned the key. The radio came on for a second, died, and the ignition clicked and clicked. I knew the battery was flat. 2 hours ago at the station, the car had started first time, even if I had left the lights on. But I hadn't left the lights on. A cold panic hit me. I took a swig of the whiskey. I couldn't sleep in the car all night. I would die. I don't want to die. Back in the house, I wondered what I was going to do all night. I must not fall asleep. I had noticed some old books and volumes when I explored downstairs yesterday. Assorted dusty adventure stories and tales of empire. As I sorted through them, I came across a faded velvet photograph album. In the cold, deserted sitting room, I began to discover the past. High Fallen House, 1910. The women in long skirts with miraculous waists, the men in shooting tweeds, the stable boys in waistcoats, the gardening boys wearing flat caps, the maids in starched aprons. And here they are again in their Sunday best, a wedding photograph. Joseph and Mary Locke, 1912. He was a gardener. She was a maid. In the back of the album, loose and unsorted, were further photographs and newspaper cuttings. 1914. The men in uniform. There was Joseph. I took the album back into the kitchen and put it next to my wooden soldier. I had on my coat and scarf. I propped myself up in the 2 chairs by the wood-fired range and dozed and waited and waited and dozed. It was perhaps 2 o'clock when I heard a child crying. Not a child who has scraped his knee or a lost toy, but an abandoned child. A child whose own voice is his last hold on life. A child who cries and knows that no one will come. The sound was not above me. It was above the above me. I knew where it was coming from. I put my hands over my ears and my head between my knees. I could not shut out the sound. A locked up child, a hungry child, a child who is cold and wet and frightened. Twice I got up and went to the door. Twice I sat down again. The crying stopped. Silence. A dreadful silence. I raised my head. Footsteps were coming down the stairs, not one foot in front of the other, but one foot dragging slightly, then the other joining it, steadying, stepping again. At the bottom of the stairs, the footsteps paused. Then they did what I knew they would do, with all the terror in my body. The footsteps came towards the kitchen door. Whatever was out there was standing 12 feet away on the other side of the door. I stood behind the table and picked up a knife. The door swung open with violent force that rammed the brass doorknob into the plaster of the wall. Wind and snow blew into the kitchen, whirling up the photographs and cuttings on the table. I saw that the front door itself was wide open, the entrance hall like a wind tunnel. Holding the knife, I went forward into the hall to shut the door. The pendant metal lantern that hung from the ceiling was swinging wildly on its long chain. A sudden gust lurched it forward like a child's swing pushed too high. It fell back at force against the large semicircular fan light over the front door. The fan light shattered and fell round my shoulders in shards of sharp rain. Flicker, buzz, darkness. The house lights were out. No wind now, no cries. Silence again. Glass hit the snow-lit hall. I walked out of the front door and into the night. At the drive, I turned and I saw them, the mother and child. The child was wearing the woolen dress. She had no shoes. She held up her arms piteously to her mother, who stood like stone. I ran forward. I grabbed the child in my arms. There was no child. I had fallen face down in the snow. Help me. That's not my voice. I'm on my feet again. The mother is ahead of me. I followed her. She's going towards the walled garden. She seems to pass through the door, leaving me on the other side. Do not enter. I tried the rusty loop handle. It broke off, taking a piece of the door with it. I kicked the door open. It fell off its hinges. The ruined and abandoned garden lay before me. A walled garden of 1 acre used to feed 20 people, but that was a long time ago. There were footprints in the snow. I followed them. They led me to the bothy, its roof patched with corrugated iron. There was no door, but the inside seemed dry and sound. There was a tear-off calendar still on the wall. December 22nd, 1916. I put my hand in my pocket and realized that the key from the nativity was there. At the same time, I heard a chair scrape on the floor in the room beyond. I had no fear anymore. As the body first shivers and then it numbs with cold, my feelings were frozen. I was moving through the shadows as one who dreams. In the room beyond, there was a low fire lit in the tiny tin fireplace. On either side of the fire sat the mother and child. The child was absorbed in playing with marble. Her feet were blue, but she did not seem to feel the cold any more than I did. Are we dead then? The woman with the shawl over her head looked at me with deep, expressionless eyes. I recognized her. It was Mary Locke. She nodded at me or not at me, and at some other me in some other time, I do not know. Her gaze went to a tall cupboard. I knew that my key fitted this cupboard, and I must open it. I did so. A dusty uniform fell out, crumpling like a puppet. The uniform was not quite empty of its occupant. The back of the faded wool jacket had a long slash where the lungs would have been. I looked at the knife in my hand. Open the door. Are you in there? Open the door. I woke to blinding white. Where am I? Something's rocking. It's the car. I'm in my car. A heavy glove was brushing off the snow. I sat up, found my keys, pressed the unlock button. It was morning. Outside, the guards from the train and a woman who announced herself as Mrs. Wormwood. Fine mess you've made here, she said. We went into the kitchen. I was shivering so much that Mrs. Wormwood relented and began to make coffee. Alfie fetched me, she said, after he spoke to your friends. There's a body, I said, in the walled garden. Is that where it is? Said Mrs. Wormwood. At Christmas 1914, Joseph Locke had gone to war. Before he left for Flanders, he had made a nativity scene for his little girl. When he came back in 1916, he had been gassed. They heard him climbing the stairs, gasping for breath through froth-corrupted lungs. His mind had gone, they said. At the night in the attic,
where he slept with his wife and child. He leaned vacantly against the wall, rolling the child's marbles up and down and up, pacing, pacing, pacing. One night, just before Christmas, he had strangled his wife and daughter. He left them for dead in the bed and went out. But his wife was not dead. She followed him. In the morning, they found her sitting by the nativity, her dress dark with blood, his finger marks livid at her throat. She was singing a lullaby and pushing the point of the knife into the back of the wooden figure. Joseph was never found. Are you going to call the police? I said. What for? Said Mrs. Wormwood. Let the dead bury the dead. Alfie, the guard, went out to see my car. It started the first time. The exhaust blew in the white air. I left them clearing up and was about to set off when I remembered I had left my radio in the kitchen. I went back inside. The kitchen was empty. I could hear the two of them up in the attic. I picked up the radio. The nativity was on the table as I had left it, but it wasn't as I had left it. Joseph was there, and the animals, and the shepherds, and the worn out star. And in the center was the crib. Next to the crib were the wooden figures of a mother and child. So there you go. Oh, that is, again, Dark Christmas by Jeanette Winterson. So, I got to tell you, it's pretty funny. Right about 3/4 of the way through that, like the toilet started running in the next room, and I about shit my pants. I don't know if you guys saw the expression on my face when that happened, because it scared me as I was reading the story. That's funny. I guess that's when you know it's a good story. When I was a little bit nervous reading it. Krampus. I know, because I'm like, I don't know. All right. Let's see here. Yeah, this is a good one here. Let's read this one. All right, this one is called A Strange Christmas Game by Charlotte Riddell. Maybe Rydell. I don't know. Riddell. Charlotte. It was in the middle of November when we arrived at Martindale and found the place anything but romantic or pleasant. The walks were wet and sodden. The trees were leafless. There were no flowers to save a few late pink roses blooming in the garden. It had been a wet season, and the place looked miserable. Claire would not ask Alice down to keep her company in the winter months, as she had intended, and for myself, the Cronsons were still absent in New Norfolk, where they are meant to spend Christmas with old Mrs. Cronson, now recovered. Although Martindale seemed dreary enough, and the ghost stories we had laughed at while sunshine flooded the room became less unreal, when we had nothing but blazing fires and wax candles to dispel the gloom. They became more real also when servant after servant left us to seek situations elsewhere, when noises grew frequent in the house, when we ourselves, Claire and I, with our own ears, heard the tramp, tramp, the banging and the chattering which had been described to us. My dear reader, you doubtless are free from superstitious fancies. You pooh-pooh the existence of ghosts, and only wish you could find a haunted house in which to spend a night, which is all very brave and praiseworthy. But wait till you are left in a dreary, desolate old country mansion filled with the most unaccountable sounds, without a servant, with none save an old caretaker and his wife, who, living at the extremest end of the building, heard nothing of the tramp, tramp, bang, bang going on at all hours of the night. At first, I imagined the noises were produced by some evil disposed persons who wished, for purposes of their own, to keep the house uninhabited. But by the degree Claire and I came to the conclusion the visitation must be supernatural, and Martindale, by consequence, untenable. Still, being practical people, unlike our predecessors, not having Not having money to live where and how we liked, we decided to watch and see whether we could trace any human influence in the matter. If not, it was agreed that we were to pull down the right wing of the house and the principal staircase. For nights, we sat up till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Claire engaged in needlework, I reading with a revolver lying on the table beside me. But nothing, neither sound nor appearance, rewarded our vigil. This confirmed my first ideas that the sounds were not supernatural, but just to test the matter, I determined on Christmas Eve, the anniversary of Mr. Jeremy Lester's disappearance, to keep watch myself in the red bedchamber. Even to Claire, I never mentioned my intention. About 10, tired out with our previous vigils, we retired to rest, somewhat ostentatiously, perhaps. I noisily shut the door of my room, and when I opened it half an hour afterwards, no mouse could have pursued its way along the corridor with greater silence and caution than myself. Quiet, quiet in the dark, I sat in the red room. For over an hour, I might as well have been in my grave for anything I could see in the apartment. But at that end of the time, the moon rose and cast strange lights across the floor and upon the wall of the haunted chamber. Hitherto, I kept my watch opposite the window. Now I changed my place to a corner near the door, where I was shaded from observation by the heavy hangings of the bed and an antique wardrobe. Still I sat on, but no sound broke the silence. I was weary with many nights watching and tired of my solitary vigil. I dropped at last into a slumber from which I awakened by hearing the door softly opened. "John," said my sister in almost a whisper. "John, are you here?" "Yes, Claire," I answered. "But what are you doing up at this hour?" "Come downstairs," she replied. "They are in the oak parlor." I did not need any explanation as to whom she meant, but crept downstairs after her, warned by an uplifted hand of the necessity for silence and caution. By the open door of the oak parlor, she paused, and we both looked in. There was the room we left in darkness overnight, with a bright wood fire blazing on the hearth, candles on the chimney piece, the small table pulled out from its accustomed corner, and two men seated beside it, playing at cribbage. We could see the face of the younger player. It was the man of about 25, of a man who had lived hard and wickedly, who had wasted his sustenance on his health, and who had been, while in the flesh, Jeremy Lester. It would be difficult for me to say how I knew this, how in a moment I identified the features of the player with those of the man who had been missing for 41 years. 41 years that very night. He was dressed in the costume of a bygone period. His hair was powdered, and around his wrists there were ruffles of lace. He looked like one who, having come from some great party, had sat down after his return home to play cards with an intimate friend. On his little finger there sparkled a ring. In the front of his shirt there gleamed a valuable diamond. There was a diamond buckles in his shoes, and according to the fashion of his time, he wore knee breeches and silk stockings, which showed off his advantageously the shape of a remarkable good leg and ankle. He sat opposite the door, but never once lifted his eyes to it. His attention seemed concentrated on the cards. For a time there was utter silence in the room, broken only by the momentous counting of the game. In the doorway we stood, holding our breath, terrified and yet fascinated by the scene which was being acted before us. The ashes dropped on the hearth softly and like the snow. We could hear the rustle of the cards as they were dealt out and fell upon the table. We listened to the count, 15-2, 15-4, and so forth. But there was no other word spoken till at length the player, whose face we could not see, exclaimed, "I win. The game is mine." Then his opponent took up the cards and sorted them over negligently in his hand, put them close together, and then flung the whole pack in his guest's face, exclaiming, "Cheat, liar, take that." There was a bustle and confusion, a flinging over of chairs and fierce gesticulation, and such a noise of passionate voices mingling that we could not hear a sentence which was uttered. All at once, however, Jeremy Lester strode out of the room in so great a hurry that he almost touched us where we stood, out of the room, and tramp, tramp, tramp up the staircase to the red room, whence he descended in a few minutes with a couple of rapiers under his arm. When he re-entered the room, he gave, as it seemed to us, the other man his choice of the weapons, and then he flung open the window, and after ceremoniously giving place for his opponent to pass out first, he walked forth into the night air. Claire and I followed. We went through the garden and down a narrow winding walk to a smooth piece of turf, sheltered from the north by a plantation of young fir trees. It was bright moonlight by this time, and we could distinctly see Jeremy Lester measuring off the ground. "When you say 3," he said at last to the man whose back was still towards us. They had drawn lots for the ground, and the lot had fallen against Mr. Lester. He stood thus with the moonbeams falling upon him, and a handsomer fellow I would never desire to behold. "1," began the other. "2," and before our kinsman had the slightest suspicion of his design, he was upon him, and his rapier through Jeremy Lester's breast. At the sight of that cowardly treachery, Claire screamed aloud. In a moment the combatants had disappeared. The moon was obscured behind a cloud, and we were standing in the shadow of the fir plantation, shivering with cold and terror. But we knew at last what had become of the late owner of the Martindale, that he had fallen, not in a fair fight, but foully murdered by a false friend. When late on Christmas morning I awoke, it was to see a white world, to behold the ground and trees and shrubs all laden and covered with snow. There was snow everywhere, such snow as no person could remember having fallen in 41 years. It was on just such a Christmas as this that Mr. Jeremy disappeared, remarked the old sexton to my sister, who had insisted on dragging me through the snow to church, whereupon Claire fainted away and was carried into the vestry, where I made a full confession to the vicar of all we had beheld on the previous night. At first, that worthy individual rather inclined to treat the matter lightly, but when a fortnight after the snow melted away and the fir plantation came to be examined, he confessed that there might be more things in heaven and earth than in his limited philosophy had dreamed of. In a little clear space just within the plantation, Jeremy Lester's body was found. We knew it by the ring and the diamond buckles and the sparkling breastpin, and Mr. Cronson, who in his capacity as magistrate came over to inspect these relics, was visibly perturbed at my narrative. "Pray, Mr. Lester, did you in your dream see the face of the gentleman, your kinsman opponent?" "No," I answered. "He sat and stood with his back to us all the time." "There is nothing more, of course, to be done in this matter," observed Mr. Cronson. "Nothing," I replied. And there the affair would doubtless have terminated, but that a few days afterwards, when we were dining at Cronson Park, Claire all of a sudden dropped the glass of water she was carrying to her lips, exclaiming, "Look, John, there he is!" rose from her seat, and with a face as white as the tablecloth pointed to the portrait hanging on the wall. I saw him for an instant when he turned his head towards the door as Jeremy Lester left it. She explained, "That is he." Of what followed after this identification, I have only the vaguest recollection. Servants rushed hither and thither. Mrs. Cronson dropped off her chair into hysterics. The young ladies gathered round their mamma. Mr. Cronson, trembling like one in an ague fit, attempted to some kind of explanation, while Claire kept praying to be taken away, only to be taken away. I took her away, not merely from Cronson Park, but from Martindale. Before we left the latter place, however, I had an interview with Mr. Cronson, who said the portrait Claire had identified was that of his wife's father, the last person who saw Jeremy Lester alive. He is an old man now, finished Mr. Cronson, a man of over 80, who has confessed everything to me. You won't bring further sorrow and disgrace upon us by making this matter public. I promised him I would keep silent, but the story gradually oozed out, and the Cronsons left the country. My sister never returned to Martindale. She married and is living in London. Though I assure her there are no strange noises in my house, she will not visit Bedfordshire, where the little girl she wanted me so long ago to think of seriously is now my wife and the mother of my children. There you go. Mary said, you need to do this every year now, Jeff. All right. Well, there we go. That is A Strange Christmas Game by Charlotte Riddell. Whew, I don't know when that one was written. I'd have to go back and look. But she was rather wordy and difficult to, some of those sentences, a little bit more difficult to read. All right. I'm going to read at least one more here. So we'll do three. Threes are always good, right? All right. So there is a book here, and I might do two from this book, called 12 Days of Christmas Horror by Rick Wood. And I thought this one was kind of fun for, a lot of you guys remember Elf on a Shelf. And, you see all the memes and everything now of, so-and-so on a bagel or whatever. I never get those memes. I never understand them. People post them on Facebook all the time, and I don't know what the hell they're talking about. But so I always get confused. But let me take a drink real quick. All right. This one by Rick Wood called Elf on a Shelf. The first day. So the story goes, an elf is placed upon a shelf at the beginning of December. A toy elf, of course, though the magical wonder of a child's imagination will surely make it come to life. It is an elf that has been placed there by Santa to watch over the children of the house, or so the children are told, to help him with his naughty and nice list. The elf may move around without the children seeing, though, as we quite know the parents do this. The movement of the elf is to allow it to watch the children from various points of the house. The children are not permitted to touch this elf. I repeat, the children are not permitted to touch this elf at all, under any circumstances, not even a little. The elf must remain where he is, just as he has been placed, on the shelf, watching, always watching. So when Julie came down one day to find the elf removed from the shelf she had left it upon and placed neatly on the fireplace, you can imagine her irritation. Not that the kids had touched the elf. It's just a toy after all. It was that she had attempted to enhance the magic of the holiday to make the season more special, and the children had disregarded the clear instructions not to move the elf, meaning that they had almost ruined another way that Julie had tried so desperately to enhance the holiday's charm. It was her job to move the elf, and then to do it in secret. She wished to provide her children with a piece of Christmas joy as they watched the elf discreetly moved into different positions. She wanted to see the looks on their faces when she came down in the morning and they said, "Mummy, Mummy, the elf has moved again." So later that day, when her twins, Clark and Andrea, were at the kitchen table eating their lunch, Julie addressed the situation. "So," Julie began, "the elf has told me something very important." The kids perked their heads up, smiling, as if they were expecting good words from the elf, perhaps a hint of a verdict as to whether they had been naughty or nice. Something that I'm not particularly happy about, Julie added, to quell their incorrect excitement. The children looked at each other, confused. Their sandwiches remained in their hands, hovering over their plates. He told me that one of you moved him. They looked at each other with accusatory glances. Now you need to own up. Just know that the elf was not very happy about this, and he has told me that should one of you move him again, he will have no choice but to tell Santa. It wasn't me, said Clark. It wasn't me, echoed Andrea. I don't need to know who it was, so as long as it doesn't happen again. She left them to their lunch, considering the matter settled. Later on, when they weren't looking, she lifted the elf from the fireplace and returned it to its shelf. The second day. Julie wandered back downstairs the next morning, dressed in her fluffy red dressing gown. An especially festive dressing gown she only saved for the holiday season. Not only did it help her feel that Christmas tingle, it was also snuggly and warm. This thing is itchy and hot. Just saying. She heard the kids playing nicely in the living room. She went straight to the kitchen and put the kettle on. She made herself a coffee with a little extra sugar. It's Christmas after all, and leant against the sink. She held the cup up in both of her hands, letting it warm her. It was always coldest in the morning, before the timer for the heating switched on. She closed her eyes momentarily and then opened them. The sight didn't even register at first, but she could tell something was peculiar. Something was out of place. Then she realized the elf was staring back at her, on top of the stove. She growled. It surprised her to make such a noise, but she made it nonetheless. Now this was infuriating. She had told those children not to move it. She was trying to bring a little festive cheer to them, create a bit of excitement, and they messed with it. They would not ruin the holiday magic she was trying to create. She slammed her mug on the side and marched through to the living room. All right, who did it? She demanded. Clark and Andrea stopped playing and looked up at their mother blankly. Don't look at me like that. I want to know, was it one of you or did both of you do it? Do what? Asked Clark. You know what. They looked at each other again blankly. Stop that, Julie insisted. You know, the elf is on the stove. Why would it ever be there? Because it moved in the night, Mommy, said Andrea, like you told us. That's what you said it does, said Clark. No, She was stumped. She didn't know what to say. She didn't want to just blurt out that she was the one moving it, but she couldn't tolerate obvious lying. Make sure it doesn't happen again. I mean it this time. She stormed out of the room and finished her coffee. The third day. The next day, she returned to the living room to find the elf not on the shelf she had returned it to, but back on the fireplace. However, this time there was something sandwiched between its hands, a little folded piece of paper, a note. She felt her arms shake. The children ran in and came to a stop. What is it, Mummy? Clark asked, noticing the look on her face. What's this? Julie asked. What's what? This. She reached out and grabbed the note, gesticulating with it as the two children stared up at her gormlessly. This note, what is it? Is it from the elf? Asked Clark. No, I damn well know it's not from the elf. Which one of you moved it this time? It moved itself, Mummy, said Andrea. No, it didn't. But it did. It didn't because I know when it moves. It tells me. Both Clark and Andrea shook their heads. He doesn't speak to you, Mummy, said Clark. I'm not playing games, snapped Julie. Go get your breakfast. They both shuffled out of the living room as she stood there, wiping sweat from her brow and placing her hands on her hips. Whatever was she going to do with them? Then she realized she was still holding the note. Out of sheer curiosity, she lifted the note and unfolded it. There, scribbled in childish handwriting, were 6 terrifying words. I am going to kill you. She stared wide-eyed, reading it again and again to be sure. She readied herself to charge into the kitchen and demand whether they thought this was funny, whether they enjoyed ruining Christmas, whether they were happy to have spoilt the fun she was trying damn hard to create for them. But they would both just deny it again. Instead, she tried to keep an element of control. She grabbed the elf and marched through the kitchen. I am not amused, she barked, and threw the elf in the bin. Mummy, cried Andrea. What are you doing? Cried Clark. Ending it, she said. The elf is gone now. You can stop playing with it. He has watched and decided you don't deserve any gifts this year. No one said anything. She made her breakfast and coffee with stiff movements, opening and slamming doors and cupboards, doing so with rigid silence. The fourth day. Having dropped the children off at their father's the previous afternoon, Sheila felt a wave of relief. The whole elf debacle had caused her a lot of stress. After a much-needed night to herself, she had chosen to go to sleep early. Yet somehow she woke up late. The foggy Christmas sky allowed a shaft of light through the curtains. She reached for the light, putting her hand out while still opening her eyes. Instead, she felt something else, something sharp. She turned her head and immediately jumped. The elf sat beside her on the bedside table, its stuffed arms resting either side of a large kitchen knife. She shot out of bed and backed up against the wall. What the fuck, she gasped. She tried to figure out how the children could have done this. She dropped them off yesterday afternoon. She was sure she didn't see the elf here later when she had come to bed. But she couldn't be sure, could she? She hadn't particularly paid attention to her bedside table. She had turned the light on and off without looking, using its soft glow to read her book. But surely she'd have seen if the elf had been there, unless the children had snuck in somehow. No, that's crazy. Their father lived 10 miles away. They'd have had to walk a long way. And why would they do that? How on earth did the elf manage to? She was not taking any more chances. She took it to the car without changing out of her pajamas. She drove out of the estate further down a few country roads until she found a friend's house who was renovating and therefore had a skip on the street outside. She threw the elf in, looked at her hands to make sure it still wasn't there, just to be sure, and she returned home. The fifth and final day. Julie awoke the next day to hear talking and laughter from downstairs. She wasn't due to pick up the kids until later that day, but she was sure it was their voices. What on earth were they doing here? She looked at her bedside table. No elf. She couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief, as silly as it was. She walked downstairs, saw her children in the kitchen, and walked through the living room, the shelf, the fireplace, anywhere else. No sign of it. Into the kitchen, she looked around. It was gone. Relief fell through her. Never had she thought she'd be so pleased not to see a stuffed toy. Finally, she turned her attention to Clark and Andrea. What are you doing here? She asked. I'm supposed to pick you up later. Daddy dropped us off early, Clark said. You seem stressed lately, and we thought it would be nice to make you breakfast, Andrea said. And that they had. Out before her was a laid table with a normal cereal and a space for her. On her mat were two nicely browned pieces of toast with an assortment of jams and butters. Oh, Julie said, taken back. This is lovely of you. She sat in her place. Thank you, she said to her children, sincerely, who had just smiled back. She spread some marmalade over her toast, smiling again at her kids. They were sweet, really. Maybe she had been a little harsh. She took a large bite. Her kids kept watching her, and watching her, and watching her. She took another bite, and another, and another, and all the time smiling at their eager, staring faces. At first, she thought they were watching to see if she liked the breakfast they had prepared. Then she began choking. That's when Clark lifted a bottle of cyanide up from beneath the table, and Andrea lifted the elf. What the? She managed before stuttering and gagging. As she lost her breath and entered the final minute of her life, she watched her children give a satisfied smile to each other and to the toy. Her head fell on the table. Blood trickled from her nose. She remained motionless as she witnessed her last sight, and heard her last words. We did as you asked, Clark told the elf. We did it just as you asked. Does this mean we've been good now? Andrea asked the elf. Does this mean we'll get presents from Santa? And just as Julie's eyes widened, she saw the elf turn its head ever so slightly and look at her. Then her eyes emptied, and she saw nothing else. There you go. Creepy, creepy Elf on the Shelf story by, I think it's, well, let me go back and look. Rick Wood in his book, 12 Days of Christmas Horror. So you guys can check that out. Let me see here. I might have one more. Let's see how long this is. All right, yeah. We'll read one more. And this one's called Tommy's Christmas by John R. Little. Let me grab a drink. Lord.
Mary said the spirits even want to hear the stories too. That's good. Oh. Mary said, I'm sure you have a visitor behind you. Yeah. The crazy thing. Background. All right. I was being nosier than I should have been. Goddamn kid. I never even heard the little bastard coming into the room until he cried, Santa. Then he ran over and hugged my leg. Hi there, kid. He rubbed his eyes and yawned. He was maybe 3 years old, 4 at the most. His hair was brown like a sparrow and stuck out at odd angles. I swallowed and slowly put the silver candlestick back on the mantel over the stone fireplace beside me. The burlap sack was almost full anyway. If I could just get rid of the damn kid, I would leave the rest of the loot and just split. Did you bring me toys, Santa? He was wide awake now and staring at me with big blue eyes. Christmas Eve is usually my busiest night of the year. The parents are all too drunk to wake up, and the kids are normally too worried about scaring off Santa Claus to get out of their beds if they hear me. What's your name, little boy? Tommy. Well, Tommy, has Santa ever disappointed you? He shook his head, yes. Well, you didn't bring me a Hot Wheel road race set last year like you promised. The place had seemed like a perfect setup. I had cased the joint pretty good. The parents were sleeping in a small bedroom in the basement, and only the 2 kids slept on the main floor. Maybe I hadn't been careful enough because it had seemed so easy. The house was all decorated for Christmas inside, and the family had gone to bed with all the lights still burning on the tree. There was a set of Royal Dalton figurines in a china cabinet in the dining room. I had been careful to wrap them up so they wouldn't chip. There was also a good heavy crystal set and a couple $100 stashed away in an oak bureau drawer. A gray and white cat was meowing loudly around me when I first got in. That's probably what woke the kid up. I picked up the cat by its neck and tossed it out the back door onto the porch overlooking the yard. It looked at me and hopped down the steps. I had drunk the glass of milk and ate the oatmeal cookies that the kid had left out for Santa Claus. A can of Green Giant niblet corn was sitting on the coffee table beside them. I guess it was a snack for the reindeer. The milk was warm. How come you got Danny next door a Hot Wheel set and not me? Can't have everything you want, Tommy. You'd be spoiled. That's what my mommy says. I bit my lip. Never did I like to deal with little kids. You better get to bed, you know. You ain't supposed to be up when Santa comes. You really Santa Claus? Sure I am, kid. Why? He twisted his head and scratched his ear. I don't know. How come you didn't know my name? I always get you mixed up with your brother, kid. He thought this over and said, You don't look like you did in Sears. Maybe I better get mommy. I grabbed his shoulder. Hell no, kid, don't do that. He looked scared. Big people don't believe in Santa. You know that, don't you? He nodded slowly. Aunt Betty does.
If you wake up your mommy and I have to leave and take all your presents with me. His eyes brightened and grew wide again. Presents? What did you bring me? Why, I brought you a hot. I looked behind Tommy and saw an older boy walking down the hall towards us. Oh, damn. Tommy, he said. Then he saw me. Hey, what's going on? He looked to the staircase leading down to the basement. I grabbed Tommy and covered his mouth with one hand. One word and I'll break his neck. Tommy squirmed and I tried to get loose, or Tommy squirmed and tried to get loose, but I kept a tight hold on him. The older boy was about 10, tall and skinny for his age, with short blonde hair. He wore a light green robe over his brown flannel pajamas. Put those candlesticks in the sack for me fast. He walked over and did as I asked, frowning with dismay as he saw the rest of the silver and china I had lifted. What are you going to do with Tommy? I'm getting a bit old for this business, I said. Need an apprentice. He'll be okay, even you don't try anything stupid. The idea hadn't occurred to me until I said it, but maybe it was time. Whoever heard of a fat old man like me breaking into houses? You stay put, kid. One move and your brother's dead. I grabbed Tommy, picked up the sack, and quickly climbed up the chimney. Prancer and Vixen didn't like him at first, but they'll just have to get used to him. The end. There you go. That is from okay. About the author, John R. Little is an award-winning author of suspense, dark fantasy, and horror. I won't tell you where he lives. It's weird that it says that. But anyway, that book is called Collected Christmas Horror Stories, and it is an anthology of Christmas horror shorts from all over the world. And that is the one by John R. Little called Tommy's Christmas. So there you go. All right, let's see what we got here. Mary said, Sherry, it's Bundy watching Jeff. That could be. I think he would like this one, though. There you go, guys. Man, that was a little over an hour. Did 4 stories. Hopefully you guys enjoyed them. What does Cindy said? I don't know what the hell that is. A penguin blue waving tear? I don't know what the hell that is. But anyway, Merry Christmas, everybody. Hopefully you enjoyed some of those stories, even if you're catching this on the replay. Enjoy your Christmas. Spend some time with your family. And let me know what you got for Christmas. I always like to know. I love to open presents. You know, it's funny because I always get mad because when I was a kid, there was one Christmas I was bad, real bad as shit, right? And my family took all my Christmas presents away from me and gave them to my sister. So my sister got all of my Christmas presents one year. Of course, it was because I was like stealing from the family. So like I kind of deserved it. And I got everything taken away from me. But ever since then, I don't like it when anybody gets more presents than me. So Mary said she got a new laptop. Well, that's good. So I always love opening presents. Sometimes, maybe this is just my nature. I will grab the presents from the children just to open presents. I don't know. I don't know what that is about me. But nice. You like the Elf on the Shelf? I thought that one was really good too. And I really enjoyed the first one. Like I said, I got a little creeped out myself. I got one of my cats is up here with me. I don't know what she's doing. She's like moving around. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining me for this spooky Christmas Eve, kind of retelling some old ghost stories and some new ghost stories. And yeah, I think we'll make this a regular thing. I think it's a fun thing to do on Christmas Eve. So thank you guys for joining me. Make sure you check out that episode if you haven't already with Jeff Berlanger. It is an excellent episode. Next Tuesday, we'll be doing a recap on that episode. So me, Mary, and Sherry
we'll be getting on here to talk about the Berlanger episode and talk about some New Year's stuff, because it will be New Year's Eve when we do the next Tuesday live. So yeah, we'll be doing New Year's Eve, having some good fun time talking about some creepy holiday stories and stuff, and yeah, just ringing in the new year a little bit. So join us for that at 5 p.m. on next Tuesday, the 31st. And y'all have a fantastic Christmas. Enjoy your family and your friends, and get all those presents. See you guys soon.